So what is awakening? You might have heard of spiritual awakening or awakening, terms like enlightenment, non-dual realization, all these things. You might have heard of them online, you might have read them in a book, but they can often sound a little bit mysterious, a bit exotic, and sometimes a bit confusing. And it can be difficult to try and kind of grab hold of. It might sometimes seem, well, that thing's not for me, or I don't really get what people are pointing to. And that's really understandable. So what I thought I would do is try and communicate what awakening is in the simplest possible terms. Now, I've tried this before a few times. It's a bit slippery, but I think a lot of the times the message is maybe overcomplicated. A lot of people use these fancy terms that can sound really lofty, but actually they don't really clarify anything. So hopefully I can provide a little bit of clarity as to what awakening is. So the term awakening seems to point to waking up from either sleep or a dream state. That's usually when we use it, isn't it, in life? We wake up from sleep. So in regards to spiritual awakening, the term is used to point to waking up from the dream state, you could say, of being a separate self. Now you might hear that and think, well, what do you mean a dream state? I feel really selfie at the moment. Like it's clear that I'm here, you're there. I mean, it doesn't really make any sense what you're saying, and that's understandable. That self-referential point of view, the point of view that I am separate from the entire world, and the entire world is full of separate individual identities and things all moving around each other, that's really convincing. And it's also the view that we've been born into most of the time. What I mean by that is that that's the predominant operating view of most cultures. So the very first word we use is through that lens of self and other. That I'm here, there's the world, and I will interact with it. So awakening is kind of pointing into the truth. It proposes that there's a truth that's not all we are. And that's kind of it, really. It's pretty simple when you put it like that. And I'll go into a bit more detail, but yeah, it can feel so convincing and so real that I am definitely me and you are definitely you and they are definitely them. And the only way to be in the world is from this self-centered viewpoint, operating against life and others. You know, that's really convincing. And like I said, if we've been brought into the world with that as our predominant culture, everything that we learn is through that lens, then of course it's going to feel really solid, really believable. It's going to feel like who we are on a deep level. But we can really simply feel into the fact that actually, in any moment, we're way more than just that view. So really you could say the exploration of awakening is exploring what else are we? What else are we other than this belief that I'm a fixed me? So some of the best ways to explore that are to explore the senses in any given moment. And we've all had experiences of where that self-centered storyline, the view of who I am, that's not really experienced in some moments. It could be at the moment of watching your partner give birth to your first child, for instance. That moment can just come alive and there's no you and them, it's just all of life together, Might be just something as simple as stroking your cat, there's just a felt presence of cat stroking with not much story going on. No need to really go me cat, or me cat world, do all of that mental maneuvering. Often it just relaxes But very quickly, we move into the world, and because the entire human world seems to operate from that point of view, we quickly fall back into those roles of who I apparently am, myself, Simon in this instance, So awakening is simply waking up from that erroneous belief that we are only a point of view. We are only the apparent view that I am separate from you, and that there's much more to life to experience than that. So as awakening unfolds, you will, or we will, hopefully experience more and more richness to life, because we're not just, you could say, what would you say, like kind of bringing it all together through a narrow filter, a narrow view of self-reference, a self-centered point of reference in the world. So what is awakening? That's kind of an answer. Maybe it's simple, maybe it's not. It doesn't really tell you what you wake up to. And that's because actually what you wake up to, as opposed to what you wake up from, so you wake up from this view that I'm just this character in a storyline moving through the world as a self. What you wake up to is kind of rich and indescribable, really, and ever-changing, and often, well, you could say always, but it's kind of beyond what words can encapsulate, but it can be experienced. Now, what it's not, and I think this is important to kind of put out there, it isn't an antidote to life. It isn't a fix-all solution that's going to take away all of your problems. You might have heard the terms the end of suffering before, when people talk about awakening. And in a way that's true, it's the end of self-referential suffering, the end of the suffering we cause to ourselves through self-centered rumination, thought, judgment, shame, those kind of things. But it doesn't mean that life doesn't still have its ups and its downs, its sorrows and its losses, its joys, its happiness. It's still got all of those things. So what you're not going to find after awakening is this super peaceful, sterile, completely inert landscape of life. That's not the nature of things. Life is dynamic, it changes. And what we wake up to is the dynamic, changing nature of life, which is beautiful. I mean, it's an incredible, rich, sumptuous way to be. Much more so, I would say, than being locked in that self-centered way of seeing the world. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always easy. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's challenging. But I would say, if we've awoken from that fixed view of self, we're more able to meet that challenge with ease and flexibility, it seems. What awakening also is not, it's not a cure for your medical ails. So there's a lot of people in the world that will kind of purport, is that a word? Report? Put forward? That, once we awaken through deep meditation and intimacy with our feelings, all our pains and physical ailments will go away. Now, this is a tricky message to put out there in the world. That might be the case for some people, but for a lot of people that isn't the case. If you've got a chronic pain condition, for instance, which is from nerve damage, well, no amount of awakening from delusive thought will take away your chronic pain condition. Hopefully, it'll give you more tools to be able to live an easier life with that. Similarly, if you've got, multiple sclerosis, you're not going to cure your multiple sclerosis by having an awakening. That's not really what this is. So yeah, when we're on the if you're on the path of awakening, or if this interests you in any way, just know that you need to tend to those physical, biological needs in life as well. Don't just focus on waking up, waking up, waking up, hoping that it will take away all of your physiology, your physiological needs in life. It won't. We still have this organism that we need to tend to, and tend to with care. I guess the last question really is it worth it? Is it worth it? This path of awakening. So if you've listened so far, maybe something's like sparked and you're thinking, oh, okay, maybe I can feel into the fact that there's more to life than just this self-centered point of view. Maybe I can wake up, if you want to use those terms, into something a bit more rich. So yeah, if you're interested, I would say it's definitely worth it, but it's not easy. What I mean by it's not easy is that self-referential point of view, it often feels like a bit of a clench, this coagulation of habits and thoughts and beliefs to form a self, a filter through which life is mitigated. That's normally pretty deep, pretty sticky, and attached to a lot of coping mechanisms, and potentially things like shame, loss, like pain, anxieties, all of those things, potentially addiction, potentially trauma. A lot of the way in which we mitigate life, most of our lives, is through the self, through self-referential pushing and pulling on a world. So if we start to see through that, if we start to break that down, that self-referential point of view, there's going to be quite a lot of defenses at play trying to stop you from doing it. As in like internal defenses, because they think that actually this is maybe unsafe. They maybe feel challenged. So yeah, awakening is challenging and it takes time. A lot of people that say that it's like this instant thing, I've suddenly awakened and now everything is perfect. It's like, okay, well, maybe report back in 10 years, 15 years. As life unfolds and you watch the people around you get ill and die, or maybe you get ill, awakening continues to unfold through life. So it is challenging, but crikey, it's worth it. Like it gives you, or you, apparently you, us, it gives us as beings access to a way of being that is so much richer and interconnected and suffused with emotion and love and access to real joy than we can imagine, actually. The self-referential point of view cannot imagine the amount of freedom to feel that awakening gives us access to. So yes, it's challenging, and life becomes really on the other side, there's no real sides, but through the process, life becomes real juicy and interesting and like gritty, and the sorrows become deeply sorrowful, but the joys and the laughter and the love become, like kind of heart exploding. So yes, it's like full bandwidth living. It kind of gives you access to, at least in my experience. So if that interests you, having a life of full bandwidth living, as opposed to narrow bandwidth, self-referential, pushing and pulling, trying to make myself better against the world, then why not explore awakening in one way or another?